We did have the new Nationals leader this week, Matt Canavan, being hyper Australia and telling everyone to have more babies and tell more jokes apparently would fix most things in this country. And it's one of those really condescending things I think you tell that is said to women. It's in the national interest, you should go have a baby. Well, if we want to talk about that, then let's have free universal early childhood education and a range of other services and rights at the workplace that fully support women.
Gosh, if there's anything that's going to put women off more than anything, it's going to be Matt Canavan talking about reproduction.
The presenting sponsor for Socially Democratic is Dunn Street. Dunn Street is a campaign agency that specialises in community organising. We only work with people and organisations who want to build power to make the world a better place. And if you want to create change in your world in 2026, then hit us up at dunnstreet.com.au. A special shout out to all of our Patreon members. If you want to join those wonderful supporters of our podcast and financially support our show so we can continue to produce great episodes each week, then we encourage you to click on the link in the show notes and subscribe to the Patreon of Socially Democratic. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Maurice Blackburn Lawyers. For over a century, Maurice Blackburn has stood up for fairness, championing the rights of everyday Australians and shaping landmark legal reforms. Today, they're harnessing new technologies to make justice more accessible, more efficient, and more responsive to the needs of modern Australia. All right, let's get on with today's episode.
Good morning. It's a lovely Friday morning here on Watering Country in Geelong. My name's Rebecca Thistleton and I'm the Victorian Executive Director of the McKell Institute. It's really exciting to be hosting Socially Democratic, and today I'm joined by the National Secretary of the CPSU, Melissa Donnelly.
Thanks for having me back.
We're also joined today with Benita Kolovos, the state political reporter from The Guardian.
Thank you guys so much for having me back.
So International Women's Day, we are a couple of days afterwards, but I'm pleased to be doing it this way because it means that we can have a look back on the day that was and share a bit of feedback. Mel, what were your takes after International Women's Day 2026?
Look, I think that when you look at what's happening in politics, what's happening in workplaces around Australia, it's both good that we're making progress on a range of important issues, but there's a whole range of other events going on that demonstrate just how much more there is to do in terms of representation of women and in terms of achieving outcomes that actually support women in their choices in life.
So, Benita, what were some of your reflections after this year's International Women's Day?
Look, I feel like it was a bit of a mixed bag in the sense that just globally where we are at the moment, it's almost like we've taken 2 steps forward and 1 step back with everything that's going on in the US and overseas. It feels like International Women's Day, there wasn't as much notice of it, which is a shame. But then at the same time here in Victoria, we've got 2 leaders that are women. Women's issues have been at the centre of the Allen Labor government. And I think we're going to be hearing more as we get closer to the election, like specific issues and policies and proposals all centred on women too. So, yeah, I think it was a bit of a mixed one this year.
Oh, absolutely. That's right. And compared to years past, having a look at the fact that we have had a federal Labor government now we're into a second term, what policy gains do you think there have been for women in the last couple of years?
I think there's a whole range of really important policy gains for women. We've seen in the industrial relations space a range of changes that really do some heavy lifting in supporting women at work. For example, the reforms around early childhood education and the support for of what is predominantly a female workforce. It's important, of course, for those workers who've been underpaid and undervalued, but it's also really important reform in terms of actually supporting women's participation in the workplace. So that's one of the really important things. There's been a range of others, women's health, other industrial relations reform around supporting gender equity. So we are making progress, but it does always feel like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, doesn't it?
Benita?
So obviously state politics is more my jam, but it's hard to miss how the investment, particularly in health, is is transformative for women because, not only are women going to the GP themselves, they're probably taking their kids too. Anything to bring down the cost of seeing the doctor and encouraging bulk billing will inevitably benefit women. The other one that obviously comes to mind as well is superannuation and making sure that that's paid when women are on parental leave is huge because we notice as men and women both progress in their careers, men's super balances continue to grow while women's don't because they are taking that time off to have kids. So I think that's a positive one too.
All those of us with kids in childcare too, we want to have strong workforces.
Yeah, that's right. And we want to have strong workforces. We want jobs that are well remunerated and people who want to be in those jobs. We also want to see a well-regulated sector in these areas where there is a level of vulnerability. All of these things are really important, but too often caring jobs have been seen as women's work and have been devalued. And you see that manifest now in a range of situations we have, both in terms of availability of spaces, whether it's aged care or childcare, but also issues that arise in some circumstances about quality of care as well.
Oh, most definitely. And the quality of care has become such a big issue as we've seen more and more privatisation of aged care, but also early childhood education as well. There's so many local governments that have stepped away from providing both. And a lot of not-for-profits have found it really difficult too. And when we've got a system where both aged care, early childhood education are being run for profit for shareholders, it really is only going to be the unions that are stepping up to bring that fight to employers.
Look, absolutely, Beck. And what we see in the public sector is whenever public services are outsourced or privatised, the profit motive really drives down standards, means that we both have a servicing that isn't up to scratch and, no control and no accountability for some of those measures, or at least more difficult to achieve that accountability and control. So we do need strong regulation. We do need a strong presence in this space to actually ensure that there is the quality of care, whether that's for young children or whether that's in the aged care system.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always interesting, speaking of the corporate world, seeing the International Women's Day posts that go up on social media from big companies that want to do the right thing and show that they're celebrating their female employees. But I really appreciated seeing Lauren Beckman, her Instagram account is Lauren Lately. She does a great job of breaking down policy. She did an excellent snapshot of big corporates that had very shiny International Women's Day social media posts, but then have quite deplorable pay gaps for their female employees as well. And it was, really good that she put the time and the work in there to show the difference between what people are trying to celebrate and what the lived experience is for their female employees.
Oh, absolutely. There's nothing more frustrating than seeing employers, industries celebrate with pink cupcakes, but not do the hard work on gender equity, on providing appropriate parental leave, on providing flexibility at work, on promoting women in their own workplace. So IWD, sometimes it's one of those things that it's an important day, but it also gets trivialised when it's all about cupcakes.
Oh, well and truly. Reminded me of, do you remember quite some time ago now when Warnie was being paid to promote quit smoking products, but then he was shot punching darts? Just the difference between do what I say, not what I do. It's a little bit embarrassing for those corporates to have been caught out doing that, but it needs to be highlighted. And there is every chance that there would have been someone in marketing departments who had been asked to put those social media posts together who was probably quite outraged when they saw the comparisons when they were shared online. But I think too, it's why that transparency in wages is so important as well. And it's been great that we've finally got a federal government that's in favour of doing that.
Oh, absolutely. You can't, that saying what you measure is what you set goals for. And so the work of the Gender Equality Agency in providing that transparency and visibility is really important. Otherwise, we just wouldn't know. And corporate actors would get away with saying, oh, we're all good here, no dramas. And often putting forward the one senior woman they have to prove their point. But the data that we now see from WGEA actually, provides that visibility and a level of accountability.
Definitely. And it's one way that social media is actually working in women's interests in terms of being able to share that information widely. And I think too that International Women's Day really has grown in prominence because of social media. And it's probably the only way that we know how other people are marking the day, what conversations people are having as well. And it's the only way that I would have come across what one of our Victorian senators did to mark International Women's Day. Liberal Senator Sarah Hanson, she had an International Women's Day lunch. And, I want to say International Women's Day in inverted commas because she got together a whole bunch of women just to punch down on trans women. And as far as I'm concerned, you're not a feminist if your feminism isn't actually including everyone who is a woman. And the fact that she wanted to get a whole bunch of women together that looked just like she did to celebrate just how alike they all are and have a real crack at a really marginalised and vulnerable group of women all in the name of International Women's Day was really, really gross, especially when in terms of for everything that she was saying about wanting to protect women's spaces, somehow insinuating that trans women pose a threat in a country where so many women have already been murdered. I think it's something like 7 or 8 women have already been murdered in Australia this year. And it's been by men and by men that they know as well. And somehow trying to make out like trans women are the threat is really disgusting. And I want to call out that kind of hypocrisy every time we see it because it's just vile.
Oh, absolutely. And it's so disheartening when people seek to divide women in that way. What feminism should be about, what we should be about is actually lifting everyone up and to isolate and target a small minority group who's already under a lot of pressure. It is absolutely disgusting. And, we've seen it before in the public service. We saw it, Scott Morrison, I think it was at the Times, Prime Minister, being outraged about unisex toilets in his department. Like these are not real issues. These are not the real issues that women in Australia face.
What I would add to that too, and when I was talking about how I feel like we've gone backwards, I think back to last year and the year before, and there was this rallying, I guess, call to action amongst all of Australia. We had protests down the streets of Melbourne and protests in Ballarat, one of our regional cities, where there were a number of high-profile alleged murders of women. People really wanted change. They wanted an end to family violence and these awful headlines week in, week out about it. And I just feel like that's lost prominence with everything else that's going on at the moment. I haven't really seen those sorts of articles that much this year, and I don't think that's because it's gone away. I just think that, people's priorities are elsewhere. So I think that's a good reminder to me and to our newsrooms to keep on that issue. Like we're talking about bathrooms, when women are being killed by partners, women are getting paid less when they're going to work for the same job as a man, less likely to get a promotion, more likely to, leave a relationship with less financial security. But let's just all look over here. I think a lot of people can see through that.
It never ceases to amaze me the way that women in conservative politics try and frame themselves as feminists and try and frame themselves as being on the side of women when they're on the side of politics that doesn't really tend to do a lot in our interests.
Oh, I totally agree. And we saw that a lot in the federal election and what the Liberal Party in the last federal election took to the electorate. Their attacks on working from home in the sector I represent, were really, obviously it's men and women who access those kind of rights and that kind of flexibility. But it is really important for women to have that kind of flexibility at work. And the fact that they didn't even countenance that as a political cost just shows how out of touch they are with reality. And with the reality, if you're in a big city like Melbourne and their commute, what that means in terms of how what time you can pick your kids up from school, how you can get the, loaf of bread when you've run out on a Thursday night for school lunches for the next day. These are the real lived experiences of people. And I think, everything we saw in that last federal election shows that the Liberal Party has no idea about working women and what they face every day.
Oh, that's right. I think too, the policy offering from the Libs in the last election, it really showed that they didn't actually think of women at all.
Yeah, it really does blow my mind looking back at that federal election. Half of people that vote are women, and I really can't think of anything that was directed specifically at women. If there was, they weren't plugging it day in, day out, right? And I think the Victorian government obviously saw a lot of political capital in that. So obviously the election was in May, and then by August the government announced that they were going to legislate a right to work from home 2 days a week. Yes, reservations around the policy itself are there, but it's undeniably popular. And I think we're going to be hearing more and more and more about it the closer we get to November. Last week there was confirmation that it would apply to all businesses. And there was also confirmation that the legislation would be introduced in the back half of this year to come into effect in September. And they're being really clever, right, in trying to wedge the Victorian Liberals here to see if they'll do what Dunn did, because I reckon if I had to pinpoint anything that cost him the election, it would probably be work from home and the Trump factor. But 100% work from home played a huge part.
Oh, well and truly. And I think too that there were also plenty of men that recognised the benefits that their own families have when there is flexibility around working arrangements as well when it came time for the federal election. There are plenty of men that are able to go and do the jobs that they do and have time away from the home because they do have a partner that is in the workforce but also has some flexibility as well. And I think that the more that we have working from home policies and flexible work arrangements, the more that we see men that perhaps haven't felt like they have the capacity to be doing different kid admin appointments and pickups and drop-offs and everything else. It does help to balance things out both ways. I know that my husband's a senior public servant. If it wasn't for his ability to work from home, there would be so much more of the family admin that would fall on me when it comes to things like taking your child to see a specialist, being able to do pickups and drop-offs. Without that flexibility for both parents, you either end up with one that's not in the workforce, and chances are it is going to be the mum.
Mm. And one of the interesting things to that point that we've seen in the federal public service is the highest participation of full-time women working full-time since the introduction of these kind of policies. So both anecdotally and at a holistic level, we've seen women choosing or being able to choose to increase their hours from part-time hours to full-time hours, in large part because they have that kind of flexibility at home and to manage their other responsibilities. And, we are having a debate in this country at the moment around productivity and what that means, and facilitating women's participation in full in the employment market and in the labour market is a productivity gain. And, what we instead saw from Jane Hume and others is really sneering and talking down about people who needed flexibility to manage their work-life balance.
Oh, that's right. And for women that are wanting to skill up as well, the difference between being able to access something like free TAFE to go and do a course, knowing that once you qualify, you then have the potential to work from home or to have some flexibility there, and seeing the Liberal point of view that if you get your TAFE qualification for free, you won't appreciate it as much. It just seems like a really long bow to draw when it comes to reasons why a policy like that doesn't benefit a lot of people.
And it also just speaks to, I think, something that's inheriting a lot of conservative politics, that it's only when you pay that things matter. And we know with Medicare, we know with, support around childcare, we know with public education, that people value these things. And it's not about getting out your credit card. It's about the inherent society we want to be in and what we want to see governments provide for the whole community.
In terms of where voters are at into how they're feeling about politics right now, how they're feeling about the major parties and also about the minor parties too. There's been so much polling done in the last couple of months that's started to show a real surge for One Nation. And it does seem to be more on vibes rather than anything else from a party that doesn't spend a lot of time talking about policy beyond a bit of disinformation and misinformation around migration numbers. In terms of where a party like One Nation sits and the attraction that they have to women, where is the disconnect between women that may be considering to vote One Nation for the first time, even though that's not a party that is in any way acting in their interests?
I think that's a great question, and you kind of answered it in the sense that people are really, disillusioned with the major parties. You know, the Labor government won federally with a massive jump in seats. They were given a huge mandate to do big, bold things by voters. And a lot of people don't think they've done that just yet. I think that it is this idea, right, that the status quo has just benefited, the wealthy. It's created a more inequitable Australia, and they want to see governments do more and be bold and different with their policy approaches. So I think there's that. And I also, I guess from putting my journalist hat on, I am a bit concerned about how we are reporting on all this polling. I think once we start to get the result of the Farrer by-election, we've got a by-election here in Victoria as well, Nepean in May. Once those two things happen, we'll probably get a better gauge of where the vote is at. But I think there is, I guess, a bit like of a self-perpetuating narrative, because the more that the media talks about how popular One Nation is, the more popular One Nation is becoming. So I think there should be some caveats around this at the moment until we start to see where things really are at. And also keeping in mind that federally we're in the middle of an election cycle, and I think in Victoria we'll get more accurate figures the closer we get to November.
I think for the progressive movement, the challenge for the union movement, for the progressive political movement, always is to ensure that we are speaking to women and we are speaking about their issues and delivering for them. And I think that's that's what progressive politicians and the union movement need to continue to do, to engage people who are disaffected by what's going on. And I think it's really disaffection that is driving what we're seeing with One Nation now. And when you think about intergenerational inequality and housing and so on, people are looking for answers, and it's on progressive movements to be the ones putting forward policy solutions and advocating in people's interests.
That's right, yes. I think for a lot of people that are now One Nation voters or intending to vote that way at future elections, in the past it was almost something that was that people didn't tend to admit to, voting One Nation, whereas now there's I think it's really off the back of the MAGA movement, unfortunately. People are now a bit more out and proud with the fact that they are voting One Nation, and it's more like a declaration of rejecting traditional politics and rejecting the traditional parties as well. But I've noticed too that sometimes online, if people are called out for particular views as being racist or sexist or right wing, there's still not an acceptance or even a belief or a feeling that they themselves are right wing. There's no real sense of wanting to be, no one wants to be considered a racist or sexist or anything else. But when people are called out on their voting preferences and it's suggested to them that perhaps they are right-wing, they're very keen to try and distance themselves from that and say, oh, I'm actually more around the centre. And that was something that was picked up in the Australian election survey last year as well, where people weren't necessarily seeing themselves as having a change in political identity. It was more just they felt like their traditional parties didn't offer them anything anymore. And for those of us that are on the progressive side and massive policy nerds, that can be a little bit difficult to believe sometimes. But when you have a look at the fact that even if they are being told time and time again that Labor is doing things to improve healthcare, to improve housing affordability, if you're not feeling that in your own day-to-day life, you're not going to be convinced.
Yeah, and I think that people engage with politics and policies on what matters for them. And there are a range of intergenerational issues that are particularly challenging. If you're trying to buy a house in Sydney or Melbourne at the moment, that is so supremely difficult, given what has happened with pricing and so on. So I think that it's important that the progressive movement in both politics and the union movement deal with people where they're at and actually seek to deliver real solutions, whether it's around housing, whether it's around tax reform, whether it's about public services that actually support people in their life. That's what the progressive movement is about, and that's what we need to be doing, and we need to meet people where they're at. And for a lot of people, times are tough. And, they're either looking at trying to, buy a house and ensure their own future, or, lots of people are also looking at their kids and saying, well, my kids are never going to be able to afford a house. And that's a really challenging thing. And I think people don't want to leave Australia in a worse position for the next generation. And this is the moment in time that we need to actually think about some big ideas to deliver on this. And if the progressive movement, the union movement, progressive politics can think about that and deliver, then that's the bridge of trust to people who are currently disaffected.
Well and truly, I think too, for everyone that may not necessarily want to take an interest in politics, the level of dissatisfaction is high enough there that it is going to take something quite drastic to try and shift that. I remember a little while ago I was at our local urgent care clinic and looking around at the other people there. I remember thinking to myself, I doubt very much that anyone else besides me is going to walk in and think, what a fantastic initiative of a Labor government, purely because that's just the way that I'm going to see things, because I remember clearly when it was announced. But by the same token, if someone is scrolling through their social media, there is every chance that a video from our local federal member, Libby Coker, wouldn't actually crop up on their algorithm because they've made it very clear to their algorithm that's not where their interests lie. Or if it did, they would be thinking, well, that's another politician and I don't want to hear from them. So they'll scoot on and look for some funny memes or something else that's more in line with hobbies, or even aligns more with that dissatisfaction and anger and fear, rather than a local politician trying to tell them a good news story.
Yeah, for sure. I think we're all in our own echo chambers depending on what we're interested in, right? I get a lot of politics on mine. I got married, I think, last year, the year before, and there was a period there that it was all weddings. And now I think the algorithm knows, okay, you've been married for a little while. Let's start posting egg freezing ads and all sorts of baby content. So, yeah, I think social media is a massive problem. We're all aware of it now, but I still don't think we've got an answer to it. I think there needs to be a lot more social media literacy. It is positive that young people are now limited, whether it's going to work perfectly. There are questions, but they are limited on social media. I think that helps, and that should be combined with that sort of educational piece too. But a point that I've discussed, with Rebecca in the past is that the people that are commenting or doing this sort of awful divisive stuff on social media, it's not the young ones, it's the middle-aged people that just post whatever they like on social media because they don't have that literacy around it. So, yeah, I think it's a big task for politicians to try and get that message out. I honestly think the best way to do it is actually, knocking on doors, doing listening posts, because once you actually get in front of a person and talk to them, you kind of meet in the middle in a way that you might not when it's online and you're in your room, they're in their room, and there's a bit of freedom to say whatever they would never say to someone's face. So I think it's more about, I think everyone's calling it going analog, like getting back to that kind of face-to-face political interactions, I think will be really positive, and I hope we see a bit of that here in Victoria come the election.
Yeah, I mean, I think social media does have that, immense capacity for for confirmation bias. What you already think it's going to tell you more and more and more, and people get, to a very particular point in their algorithms, which confirms everything they think, which isn't a good thing for body politic and for political debate and for a broader understanding. We also see, I guess, pretty horrific online behaviour by individuals and by bots, and for me, the Voice referendum was one of those points where you do look at what's happening online, and it was really broken down in terms of the capacity to have a respectful discussion at that point was not there in any way. And when we think about democracy and the ability to have kind of respectful debates and actually deal with some big issues, the way in which social media targets people's and confirms people's biases, and the way in which it allows just for online content that it really is really demeaning often to women isn't helping us.
It's really not. And broken down is such a good way to describe that, Mel. It's been absolutely cooked, and seeing some really alarming statistics around the views of a lot of Gen Z men that they have towards women that are in a lot of ways far more aggressive than anything you would hear from a baby boomer, even from their own parents. And that's all coming from online. Do you think that there is the potential for the federal social media ban to have an impact on that, or is it something that's quite out of control?
Obviously, the ban is positive in the sense that it's stopping younger people from or limiting their access, right? But I think there is a lot more that needs to be done around like the thinspo that's going on online. Like it was a big thing when I was when was it, like 2010, like this, like it's just glorified eating disorder content. And it was a big thing in spaces like Tumblr and the like. And I thought that was gone. But I'm noticing on TikTok and Instagram these days that it's coming back, and this sickly thinness, this promotion of peptides, all this sort of unregulated, untested stuff. It's taking on a really ugly edge. And I know this is a political podcast, and I did hear this theory that when governments get more regressive, so in the US is case in point, where they go more regressive, they go more conservative, thinness is idealized again. And then I was thinking about the Obama era, and it was the era of body positivity. So maybe this is some sort of political cycle that we're seeing. But I do think, the one, I guess, con about the social media ban was it doesn't really take the social media companies, there's no onus on them to make their platforms better for the people that are still using them that aren't under 16. So I want to see more in that space.
For all of the talk and discussion and people urging the federal government to be able to have more influence over the algorithm as well, there are some cases where content it's very black and white around what should be allowed and what shouldn't be. But it gets very difficult very quickly and comes down a lot to personal opinion too on what constitutes online content that should or shouldn't be allowed, and where free speech does start to come under attack as well. And while there absolutely might be benefits at curbing some of that, getting to a point where we would actually be able to progress legislative reform would be incredibly hard.
Exactly. It is absolutely a fraught area. And, some platforms have dealt with it worse than others, I think. But it is troubling. I think it is problematic for the way in which we have political debates, but there's not an easy answer.
No, and when it's so profit-driven, and there are so many offshore Facebook groups that are able to churn out content that has no actual factual basis at all, but it really stokes into people's fear about population and migration and views on race, that really does start to feed into One Nation messaging, regardless of whether or not One Nation has got anything to do with it.
Well, we've seen this week, there was an article in the ABC about all these accounts that were spouting, I guess, One Nation talking points that weren't at all related to One Nation. There's also the case of the Premier last week. Her Instagram account exploded overnight with thousands of followers, and, you know, people were saying, oh, you know, maybe she bought them. There is no way that she would buy these accounts that are going on to absolutely rip into her in such an awful way in the comments. So that kind of hints at more of a targeted attack. And we saw the same thing happen during the Voice referendum around people that were like advocating for a yes vote. Like, they were getting spammed by followers, you know, they're bots, right, that were attacking them. So, yeah, I think it's an absolute minefield. Like, I don't envy anyone trying to legislate in this space, but we probably do need to have these discussions, because I don't see, like, where do we go from here? It feels like it's getting worse and worse and worse to be on the internet, and particularly to be on the internet as a woman in politics, right?
Yeah, that's right. And we've seen in a range of ways overseas political groups really lean into Australian politics at different times and for different reasons. And, you know, I don't think that's a good thing for democracy either. And, you know, we have social media. We also had at the last federal election all sorts of behaviour on polling booths, which is obviously subject to a parliamentary inquiry right now, which were quite intimidating for people. So there does seem to be a range of ways where there's a breakdown in how we engage in these topics, and I don't think it's to the advantage of any policy outcome that we're in this space.
That's right. And it is good that there is a parliamentary inquiry looking at what happened at the last federal election as well, because we don't want to be in a situation where just because Labor had such a thumping win and got this massive majority, that it allows some of the awful behaviour from the election to go unchecked. And there needs to be an investigation. There also needs to be a lot of work done to find out what on earth it was that Peter Dutton had promised to the exclusive brethren in exchange for their support as well. Because if there aren't efforts made to get in and make sure that we can curb any sort of shady agreements or really disgusting behaviour on polling booths, that could take us to a really dark place in future elections.
Yeah, I think that this was also happening in 2022 at the state election, when we'd come out of COVID lockdowns and there were all these micro parties and independent candidates running. We had an inquiry into that election, and it said the same thing. And I can't remember if it's state or federal, but one of them caps the number of volunteers at booths, and I think that both should absolutely have a cap. It's not to limit volunteers from being there, and they do play a really important role, and people do want to speak to them and get a how to vote card. I'm not saying that we don't do that, but to have swarms of people, like you're running a gauntlet to vote, like that's not fair on the voter. Like, you should have a couple people there, pick up your how to vote, and in you go. It is quite intimidating what it's become.
Absolutely. And some of the behaviour that we saw at that time was pretty disgraceful, and any political party should be calling that out. My parents live in the seat of Bennelong. My mum is in her late 70s, and when she went to vote, she was absolutely hassled and yelled at by volunteers on booths there. Like, it was really toxic. And you know, I mean, firstly, I don't think it helped I don't think it helped the Liberal Party in any way, that kind of behaviour. But people should not, in Australia, people should not be hassled walking in to vote. There are always volunteers there, but it like what descended in some of those polling booths, particularly in Bennelong, was absolutely atrocious.
Yes, and not really scenes that we ever thought that we would see in Australia, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's right. And it just becomes this heightened and quite ugly spat, and let alone the circumstances in which there was such a huge group of exclusive brethren handing out, you know, it's quite extraordinary.
Yes, yeah. the people that are handing out on polling booths as well, for the most part, are doing it from a really well-intentioned place as well. And we don't want to be in a situation where we've got, the Labor volunteers that have been handing out election after election saying, you know what, I don't think I want to do this anymore because it just gets too vile. That's
right. I mean, I've handed out lots of elections and, whatever other volunteers are there. My approach always is to talk to people and, everyone is standing there on a Saturday morning. Handing out, and whether you agree with all their political positions or not, generally well intentioned, but you do see it descending over time. And I think last year what we saw was this real flashpoint, and it's ugly. I don't think we want to see that moving forward in Australia.
That's right. Even though you can be, you're handing out with people that have really different values to yourself. I think we've all been there, especially on pre-poll at different times of day when it gets pretty quiet and someone's happy to share a bag of jelly snakes and have a bit of banter around there as well. You don't have to be a jerk just to get the job done handing out at a polling booth.
Yeah, I agree totally. Well, my daughter loves handing out. It's one of her favourite things to do. She thinks elections are determined by her handing out ability, and so often it's fine and everyone is nice to her, etc. But last election there were people who, while she's standing there, were yelling, etc. And it's really, I think it's just both unfortunate, unnecessary, and it's not what we want to see.
No, that's right. We've got 2 state elections coming up. We've also got the Farrer by-election as well. In terms of the elections for 2026, how do you think that women, in terms of being party leaders and as candidates and policies that are centred on wanting to attract female voters, how do you see things playing out over the next couple of months?
Well, I guess, the big political question over those elections that are coming up is, what actually happens on the right side of politics and with One Nation votes at the ballot box. I think for women in particular, we saw last year at the federal election a very poor offering from the Liberal coalition for women. I don't think they've remedied that in any real way. I don't think their policy positions have changed in any substantial way for women. So I do think women look at politics in terms of what it delivers for them, as they should. And I think that there's not much on offer from the coalition in any of those elections really for women. Women are an afterthought too often in conservative politics. So it will be interesting, obviously, to see what happens in a range of those elections, particularly with the polling around One Nation. But I also think it's incumbent on progressive politics, on the Labor Party, on Labor governments to continue to deliver for women, because it's actions, not words. It's actually delivering outcomes for them. Whether it's around flexibility at work, whether it's around childcare, whether it's around healthcare, that matters. That's why we're here.
It really does. And for both the Victorian and the South Australian Labor governments, they both have terrific stories to tell in how they have supported women. I'm wondering, though, how much, if any, consideration is going to be given to policies concerning women in the Farrer by-election.
So, in Victoria, we're in a really unique position because for the first time ever, we've got a female Labor leader in Jacinta Allen and a female Liberal leader in Jess Wilson. And, we don't want to ignore the Greens either. So Ellen Sandell is their leader too. So 3 women leading political parties. I think it's great in the sense that it just takes the whole gender argument out of it, right? I was a bit concerned that some people would, it's probably still there, right, in the Premier's unpopularity figures, but, not wanting to vote for her for a reason that they couldn't articulate, and it was probably because she was a woman and they just didn't like a woman telling them what to do. But now you've got 3 women in those roles. I think that kind of takes that out. I do think that it will mean that we have more policies centred on women as well. It's only natural that if you're a woman at that table, you're thinking of other women in a way that maybe men don't. And I thought it was really interesting that Jess Wilson's first major policy announcement was to legislate coercive control as an offence. and the government have also now committed to doing that too. But I thought that was really important from her to show Liberal voters and women that the Liberal Party are thinking of them in Victoria. And then obviously Jacinta Allen's done so much in the women health space. Last week she announced that the contraceptive pill, you wouldn't need a script, full stop, to get that at a pharmacy, which is amazing. I think currently it's only a 1 month supply. That, puts her up against the College of GPs and the like, but so many women will know and understand that experience of, oh no, I don't have a script left and it's going to cost me, X number of dollars to go and see a doctor to literally just get a script filled out. So I'm really hopeful here in Victoria. I think you made a really good point about the Farah by-election, because obviously Labor don't run at a by-election if they don't hold the seat. I think that's the custom, I guess, for Labor. So they're not in that game. There is a really good community independent there. Her name escapes me, but she is a woman, so I hope that she'll be doing a bit in that space. But it does seem like at the moment it's the battle of the country blokes, which I guess it's a TBC on that one.
I guess it's an interesting question, isn't it? Susan Lee's long-held seat. She was the female leader of the Liberal Party, obviously knocked off. But I'm not sure how much there is on offer for women in between the likely contenders in that by-election. But women in country areas as well face really significant issues around access to services, access to childcare, access to healthcare. I think that is what parties should be talking about when they talk to what is 50% of the electorate.
Oh, absolutely. It was interesting seeing the ABC was doing some vox pops around Farah, and people were getting stuck into the Albanese government's talking about the lack of services for them there. And I felt like saying to them, sorry, but who was your local member for the last 20 years? And for how many years was there a federal Liberal government during that time? Yet you're still trying to hold the Labor government to account. It's extraordinary, and also a really good example of how Labor governments are always going to be held to that higher standard, which I think we should really wear as a badge of honour. But for people that are traditional Liberal voters questioning where services are for them and blaming Labor after 20 years of a Liberal MP, and many of those with federal Liberal governments, I thought was pretty rich.
Yeah, I think that, what we've seen from the Federal Public Service, which is obviously the members I represent at CPSU, under the coalition, we saw huge outsourcing of services. We saw really significant job cuts. We saw staffing caps. We had situations where, something like Veterans Affairs, supporting Australian veterans, that was outsourced. But they could not hold down staff. It drove a range of the issues in servicing veterans and providing on-time processing, which has driven, quite disastrous individual results for some of those people. It is the case, of course, that Labor governments should deliver strong services, but it's very soon that the coalition forget what they themselves have overseen in terms of service cuts and outsourcing and privatisation.
Well and truly, and now we've got Senator Jess Walsh having to do a massive mop-up job trying to fix some of the childcare droughts that we've got across the country, particularly in regional areas after they were just neglected for years and years by successive coalition governments.
Well, and we did have the new Nationals leader this week, Matt Canavan, being hyper Australia and telling everyone to have more babies and tell more jokes apparently would fix most things in this country. Incredible. And it's one of those really condescending things I think that is said to women. It's in the national interest, you should go have a baby. Well, if we want to talk about that, then let's have free universal early childhood education and a range of other services and rights at the workplace that fully support women.
Well and truly, and gosh, if there's anything that's going to put women off more than anything, it's going to be Matt Canavan talking about reproduction, that's for sure. Gross. Down here in Victoria, the Libs are currently shaping up for some pre-selection battles, and it's been interesting watching some of the news coming out of that ahead of the pre-selections. There are more progressive men challenging some of the more conservative women for some of the upper house seats, and former Premier Dennis Napthine has endorsed the former Geelong Mayor Trent Sullivan for an upper house spot ahead of Conservative Bev McArthur. And that's just one example of some of the fights that we're going to see play out in Victoria. And for me, as a progressive, I would much prefer to see someone like Trent Sullivan on the top of that ticket than Bev McArthur, particularly when it comes to women's issues and punching down on trans people as well. And, you know, for full disclosure, I'm a Labor candidate myself in the upcoming state election. So really, in terms of wanting to win, I should be wanting someone like Bev on the top of the ticket, because that works much more in Labor's favour when it comes to what is going to be looking attractive for voters. But finally, we are starting to see a bit of a push from some parts of the Victorian Liberal Party wanting to make sure that they have people and policies that actually appeal to voters, rather than what we've seen for successive elections, state and federal down here, people and policies that are just that little bit too extreme and don't have any ounce of progressive thought to try and win back some votes that they've just been hemorrhaging, whether it be to the ALP or to the further right.
You've absolutely hit the nail on the head. It's really interesting, right, because I'm covering those pre-selections closely, and you are absolutely right. It's all conservative women that are being challenged. And, you know, I've had a lot of phone calls from Liberal people telling me that as a feminist I should be outraged that women are being challenged. But it really is a signal from within the party that they are trying to get more moderate. They know that Victoria is a progressive state, and the only way to win elections in Victoria is if you are firmly in the centre. Like those fringe sort of issues, they don't play well in this state. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how those pre-selections play out. I think the main question I have is, will people go quietly? You know, we're talking about Bev McArthur, who's one of the, you know, key factional operatives in the Liberal Party. Moira Deeming has made headlines since she got pre-selected last time in 2022. I don't think there's been a couple of weeks where she hasn't been in the news. So I'm really curious to see where these sorts of women go after this. I think that might be the most difficult part for the Liberal Party going forward.
Yeah, and obviously, you know, representation matters. It does matter to have women in politics and women in all leadership across society, but it's not the only thing that matters. There are undoubtedly women in leadership positions who themselves do not deliver policies that support or empower women. And, you know, and there are men who do. So I think that representation matters, but also what fundamentally matters, and what fundamentally matters to women is what the policy offering is, and who is actually going to seek to, in government, deal with their concerns and deal with the things that keep them up at night that they're worried about, whether that's about safety, whether it's about healthcare, whether it's about, you know, a range of caring responsibilities, whether it's about their rights at work. Women are 50% of the population, and so often it's an afterthought in some political parties about, you know, what is on offer for women and what we're going to do about women. You know, famously Tony Abbott saying that ironing would be easier with the electricity prices is something that always stands out.
Yes, yeah. Oh, and when he made himself the Minister for Women and proceeded to do absolutely nothing with that portfolio whatsoever except ignore it. It's no coincidence. I saw a post the other day that Tanya Plibersek put up around the number of women that were in the federal parliament when she was first elected versus now, and the difference that it's made having so many women in the federal caucus in terms of the policy offering that's available, and so many of the women that are now in politics as well, and through social media, being really honest and sharing so much about themselves to really offer women an alternative in terms of the policy offering, but also be people that women that are voting can relate to as well. And I'm really pleased to use this opportunity too to give a big shout out to Jed Carney, who posted some really personal information about a coercive relationship that she was in when she was much younger and what an impact that had on her. And for anyone that knows Jed Carney now, the idea that anyone would seek to mess with her in any way just seems unbelievable. But it was very, very vulnerable, very honest of her, and it goes to show that coercive control can really happen to any woman, and is really an area where careful policy consideration is really needed if we're going to be making serious inroads to try and stomp it out.
Yeah, I think for me, like two people that really stand out as well is the Nationals MP Jade Benham, who spoke in Parliament about when she was 22 years old, a really awful incident of intimate partner violence. And if you know her, she's pretty loud and bold and brash, and I thought that was really important, and she should be very proud to do that, because hearing that it can happen to her, it's unbelievable, but it did. And then the other is the Animal Justice Party MP, Georgie Purcell. She's from day one been so honest, and she's even shared some of the awful messages she's received from men on the internet. I think she cops it quite a fair bit. I think we should also keep that in mind too when we're talking about women sharing so much of themselves, that's sometimes the consequence. But I really enjoyed, she's had a little baby girl, Lila, with the federal Labor MP, Josh Burns, recently. And I really enjoyed reading her kind of nuanced take on motherhood, on being a working mum, on having mixed feelings about being a mum prior to becoming one. And I thought that was really refreshing, probably because I am at that stage of life now as well. So, yeah, I think it's great. We all benefit when our leaders are giving so much of themselves, but I think we should also keep in mind the toll that can take, and make sure that we are, as supportive as we can be, even if they're not necessarily the same political stripes.
Yes, that's right. We've taken up a fair bit of time this morning. This has been a fantastic chat. To wrap up, if we are looking down the track to this time next year, what sort of policy improvements would you like to have seen made between now and then?
Oh, look, it's hard to name just one or two.
Yeah.
There's so much still to do. Like there has been really good progress in a range of areas in industrial relations and rights at work, in services like better provision around early childhood education and so on. I think the task as we look ahead is continuing to build on that. There are good foundations on a range of areas, but women still trail. We still have a gender pay gap. We still see services that and public provision of services that don't support women enough to get back at work when they need to, etc. So I think they're really important. I think safety and women's health are also really important public policy measures, and we have a much more open debate in this country and discussion around some of these topics than we had before. And in the IR space, that does mean making progress on things like paid reproductive leave and so on. So I think the challenge for the union movement, I think the challenge for progressive governments and politicians is to keep up the pressure and keep pushing forward in a whole range of areas that will make women's lives easier.
There's always so much more to do, isn't there?
Absolutely.
And Benita, what would you like to see change between now and next year for women?
Federally, I think there needs to be more work done on making being a parent an attractive proposition for a woman. We have to think more around childcare, and once you have a kid, where are they going to go when you go back to work, and how can we make that the safest place it can be? One thing that really stood out to me, we spoke a lot about childcare and childcare safety in Victoria last year following some really awful allegations. So I'd like to see more done in that space too. It is quite perverse to think that caring for children, just like caring for the elderly, is a money-making endeavour. So I think some boldness there from the feds would be great. At a state level, I'm really excited for this election. I want a lot of bold ideas. Going back to that idea, right, that people are really fed up with the establishment. They're really disillusioned with politics. I would love to see our leaders get bold, get creative, burn it a little to the ground, not the whole joint, but maybe some of the barriers that are there for women. So, yeah, I'm excited. I know I was a bit pessimistic about the year we've had so far, but I think hopefully this time next year we'll have a lot of amazing things to talk about.
Fantastic. Thanks, and keep fighting the good fight.
Thanks, Rebecca.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
Cheers.
Hey, Social Democrats. Thanks for listening. Today's episode was produced by Grace Eyre. If you like the show, please rate us and review us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really like the show, then join our Patreon community for early and ad-free access to each episode. We regularly take questions and comments from our Patreon members, so get in there if you want to have your say. And finally, get all the latest updates and bonus content by following Socially Democratic on our social media channels. The links are in our show notes. See you next Friday.